And how prepared do you have to be before you move forward with innovations? Then the conversation moved to the Civil War.
The Civil War.
The Civil War.
The one that happened in like the 1860s.
Yes.
All right, okay. Just confirming it wasn't some other Civil War.
No. Not the present Civil War.
Yeah,
the past
that's
Civil
what I meant.
War. He said, so like, for instance, in the Civil War, we didn't have to have that to end slavery. I said, go on. I want to hear this, I think.
Me too.
And he said, we didn't. He said, the Industrial Revolution was just about to occur right after the Civil War. In 25 years, we would have invented the tractor and we wouldn't have needed slaves.
He really said that?
He did.
Okay.
And then he said, which meant that we didn't have to lose a quarter of the white male population.
OMG.
Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Philip Nelson.
Dr. Nelson, wonderful to see you again. It's been way too long. We've been around the world and back, around the world in 80 days or so. We travel, but the world continues.
You just got back from Africa, and I just got back from Alaska, and we both just dipped our toes in the water of conservation.
Right.
But I think we're both refreshed, and I enjoyed your stories about Africa. While we were gone, I think the American part of society went topsy-turvy.
Yeah, and you know what was good in Africa? I didn't spend a lot of time worrying about what was going on in America. But when I got back, boy, was there a lot of news. You know, I think the New York Times had under their masthead all the news that's fit to print. And I tell you what, with all the media that we have, it's just all the news, whether it's fit to print or not. So the world has not slowed down. Don't want to forget to thank Nationwide for their support in our endeavors and our conversations. But it's been an interesting month or so since we spoke last. And so, Phil, we were talking and you said that, while you were traveling and doing different stuff, you ran into some different people and engaged in some courageous conversations, your own versions of courageous conversations without me. Now, do I need to be jealous and worried that you found a new person to hang with?
Oh, no. As a matter of fact, I doubt that, first of all, these individuals knew nothing about our podcast until they left. I did give them our card on the way out. And so they may be listening just out of interest, or they may have heard some of our podcasts and they will never listen again.
What do you anticipate? What do you think? Are they're gonna listen to a podcast and say we're gonna ban this guy, or what do you think is gonna come of this?
Yes, I don't know. You know, I must say that one conversation I had in one of the states I've visited for a conference, etc., was particularly interesting, and it was particularly interesting because of the theories that I had never heard before. So we started a discussion about change, and this individual began with telling me that he was from Texas, and he was definitely on the far right. And then there's the crazies even further right. Now, when he said far right, I had included him with the crazies and suddenly realized there is a differentiation, at least on the right. He didn't say moderate right, he said far right. And then he said, and since you're from California, I assume you're on the far left. Now, I'm assuming that he differentiated me from the crazies on the far left. But I didn't confirm or deny where I was because I hate labels. And it depends on the issue as to whether you might classify me on that. I know I'm a fiscal conservative. I also know that I'm a social liberal. But there are issues about educational standards where I'm a staunch conservative. On the other hand, there are issues about learning outcomes where I am a data-driven person, but I believe in innovation. So anyway, the discussion was about change, started out about change. And his point was that he doesn't believe we should have change just for change's sake. He started by asking me if I was happy with Biden's performance. Did I like what Biden was doing? And I said yes. And he said, I don't understand how you can do that, how you can take that position. He's interfering too much, and he's trying to dictate how we should live. And I looked at him and thought, well, I disagree. I think he's trying to make changes that are designed to improve our lives. And he said, well, like what? I said, well, for one thing, we're about to have an infrastructure decade rather than infrastructure week or infrastructure day, just to distract our attention from the legal troubles of the president. And he said, yeah, well, yeah, I understand. I see what you're saying about that, but that's not what I'm talking. I'm talking about the interference of drilling. Look at the price of gas. Look at oil. It's all because we're not drilling enough. We're going to have to use gas until we get green energy right. I'm all for conservation and I'm all for green energy, but you don't make change just for the sake of change. You wait until you're ready for it. And then we had a give and take discussion on what does ready mean and how prepared do you have to be before you move forward with innovations. Then the conversation moved to the Civil War.
The Civil War.
The Civil War.
The one that happened in like the 1860s.
Yes.
All right, okay. Just confirming it wasn't some other Civil War.
No. Not the President's Civil War.
Yeah,
the past.
That's what I meant.
He said, so like, for instance, in the Civil War, we didn't have to have that to end slavery. I said, go on. I want to hear this, I think.
Me too.
And he said, we didn't. He said, the Industrial Revolution was just about to occur right after the Civil War. In 25 years, we would have invented the tractor and we wouldn't have needed slaves.
He really said that?
He did.
Okay.
And then he said, which meant that we didn't have to lose a quarter of the white male population.
OMG. These actually came out of the mouth of somebody.
Yes.
We should invite him to the podcast.
I'm not sure I could hold my peace. But anyway, I had never heard this line of reasoning before.
There wasn't reasoning in that.
I'm afraid there was. As inappropriate as you think it might have been, let's say I accept the fact that a quarter of the white male population was lost in the Civil War. I'm wondering which of those men was he mourning? If we're going to start splitting it, right? But most importantly, I think my response, and I cannot tell you cogently in retrospect what my response really was. It was because it was emotional, but it was respectful. Because I realized this was my test to stay engaged in this conversation. And so my response was, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are to suggest that my ancestors were supposed to wait in slavery another 25 years until social progress found a replacement for them. How do you ignore the inhumanity of slavery itself or justify the need for slavery until you don't need it anymore? He started by saying, I don't mean to insult you, but, and then he said what I just told you. And I said, I am insulted. I am insulted because you can mourn for the 25% of the white male population that died, and you cannot mourn for the millions of African Americans that were uprooted from Africa by that white male dominated society, brought to America, made dependent on the whims of a capitalistic society, and then to tell me there was no need for a war to stop it. That in the end, everything would have been okay. And so then the conversation somehow drifted to apartheid, and he has a business concern in South Africa, where you just visited. And he claims that we shouldn't have ended apartheid as fast as we did until we had prepared the indigenous population for all the roles that they needed to be prepared for in government. And then you end apartheid. And my response was, I think you're afraid of chaos, because there is no organization anywhere that can prepare a population that wasn't prepared at all for anything anyway. And the people that were going to do the preparing didn't want to do the preparing. And there was no way you're going to overcome the tribalization, the effects of tribalization that occurring even here in America. And by the way, that tribalization was uniquely perpetuated in order to maintain apartheid.
It is amazing to me how people can look backwards and say, you know, if we just waited, everything would have been just fine. Well, they can say that after the fact, but who knows what might have actually occurred if we didn't have a civil war? Who knows what might have occurred if we didn't end apartheid? It's always interesting to look in the retrospectoscope and make and formulate an opinion about, you know, this might not have occurred. I just find it interesting to have opinions like that really don't have anything that substantiate or support them in any way, shape, or form. I mean, it's just, to me, it sounds like a completely uneducated presentation.
Well, it sounds like an educated presentation to me. It's a biased, educated presentation.
Okay, yes, I'll go with that.
But this is an intelligent man. He is a self-made man. What bothers me, and I couldn't wait to hear your perspective. However, I still find your astonishment somewhat superficial. Essentially, what this man said was slavery would have ended once we found a machine to replace the human being. And he totally ignored how those human beings would be treated after the machine replaced them. This Disney-esque world that he described, where we were going to we're going to walk out of slavery arm in arm into a docile society that's going to welcome us as part of the society. I told him that I would rather deal with chaos in exchange for the opportunity to participate in my own governance. And that chaos was created because you denied me that right for 200 years. You created the chaotic environment, not me.
Question, curiosity question. Are these ideas or opinions that this individual shared how he was educated? Is this what is being propagated in the school systems and wherever he was from? Is this some sort of bad Kool-Aid? I mean, where is he? He didn't he couldn't have made this up on his own.
Oh, he could have, but you asked the right question. This is what was surprising. This is why I'm bringing it up, because this, whether he made it on his own or not, the most appalling thing is, I believe these are discussions in the far right groups. These are the closeted discussions that don't see the general light of day because they can't survive the general light. And so the fact that he tried it on me, still applaud him, because he clearly felt that it had been refined enough for a Black man to accept, or at least listen to. When I asked him, I said, if you had been a slave, would you want to wait another 25 years? Would you want your child to grow up in those conditions? And his response was, if I had been a slave, I would have killed all the white people.
He really said that.
He did. And I looked at him and I said, oh, with all the clubs and firing tools and everything else we got from the job program.
Yeah, and you'd run him down with the chains on your ankles.
Yeah.
How did you bite your tongue through this conversation?
Did I say I bit my tongue? I just told you what I responded. But
yeah,
well, let's put it this way: you've trained me well.
Well, what the listeners can't see is the body language of that I just put my head in my hands and shook my head. That these are the types of conversations that.
But honestly, these are the types of conversations we should be encouraging.
I guess I live in a world that I have outside of with you. I don't always encourage them. So.
And that's what I'm saying. The whole time we were talking, I had a friend with me who just walked away. He could not listen to it. He didn't even want to hear the response. Well, that doesn't move us forward either.
Right.
I will tell you this, at the end of the conversation, and I was pretty emotional. I was angry. But at the end of the conversation, we hugged each other.
Wow.
And he said, you're a stand-up American, and I really appreciate the opportunity to at least share my thoughts. I don't know if I moved him one iota. I do know that he'll be very careful about who he says that to. What matters to me is whether or not he will share this story with his inner circles, because that's the only way they're going to hear my version.
Well, they're hearing some of it now if they listen to the podcast, but that would be very good. But do you have his email address?
No.
Did you consider him to be a racist?
I felt that he had views that conform with racist views. I didn't consider him a racist, however.
So he wasn't overtly hostile in any fashion, but he had views that support those who might be.
So he has a view of society,
right,
that's largely based on privilege. And he's willing to accept anyone who's willing to accept his views. We didn't get a chance to talk enough for me to really know him that deeply. And so it would be, I clearly believe, just based on that conversation, that he has no sensitivities about, I don't think he's ever tried to put himself in someone else's shoes, right? I think he's a compassionate man. But when they talk about their business concern, when he and his wife talked about their business concern in South Africa, the first question that was raised in my mind was, how does he relate to South African Blacks as opposed to African American blacks? What's his perspectives of each? And in many instances, when he would talk about his experiences in South Africa, he would use the pejorative perspective of, at a minimum, being the employer, and she would make comments that reminded me of the slave owner's wife,
Interesting.
but in a family unit kind of way.
Do you think you changed him in any way?
I do. I think he changed me, but whether it's lasting, whether it's I have no idea, because this was a one-time meet. I do believe we made a connection. I do believe that if I had a podcast with him, I'd learn a lot, but I think it would be tough on both of us. But it did illustrate just how wide the gap is in even in language. When we teach students in their first year, I'm going through, I have a PBL group right now at Western. And one of the things that I keep repeating and punching at them is, you're not just learning anatomy. Please don't memorize the words. If these words aren't creating pictures in your head, if you're not making this functional, if you look at a radiograph and see the ulnar on a radiograph, and you see the prominences that the anatomists make you remember or for a test, when you look at that radiograph, imagine the muscles that attach to those prominences that you can't see because you burned through them so you can see the bone. And understand how that origin or insertion might move that joint. Create a functional knowledge. To me, when he gave me that rationale, he had no functional knowledge of slavery. He had no functional knowledge of development, societal development. He was using his business sense and organizational skills and applying it as scientifically as he could, and believing that he could control all of the factors such that he could achieve what he needed to achieve without chaos. And that's the hubris of being human.
So, some of the opinions that you shared sound cult-like.
Well, some of the opinions that I shared may have been generated from cults.
Not you shared, but that he shared.
I understand.
Misguided logic.
Well, it's that simplistic approach. You boil everything down to simplicity.
Right.
Right. It was clear he was trying to save the lives of 25% of the white male population. That was the tragedy of the war.
Yeah, well, it is interesting that you and I and he all see different wars, saw different wars. But it goes back to some of the things we've talked about in terms of education and what's in the textbooks.
Yeah, well, I've never seen that in the textbooks. I bet you somebody's going to put that in there. And that's not a bad thing. I'm okay if somebody says, in the end, 25% of the white male population was killed. What bothers me is if they don't say, in the end, so many millions of slaves were freed. It's neither here or there. It's not black and white.
Maybe that should be the name of our podcast.
Maybe.
I like courageous conversations. That was quite a courageous conversation. What would you have liked to have said that you didn't say?
Oh, that's a good question. I would have liked to have done a better job on his sectioning or separating aspects of slavery. I wish I'd done a better job of promoting the issues of humanity that he appeared to be ignoring or not addressing. I wish I'd done a better job of discussing how real social change works and how you can't fit it in a box, an organizational box. But that would have taken half a day and 3 more drinks.
Then it would have been really interesting. Do you think he was just reporting a party line, or do you think he truly believed in what he said?
I, I don't want to say it's a party line, but I would venture to guess that this may not be a total shock or unfamiliar to some of our white listeners. I would venture to guess that some of our listeners have heard this before. And I don't mean to say that only the white listeners would know it, but I'm saying it's more likely that they may have heard it and let it go. I think he was trying it out on me because of the previous conversations we had had. At the dinner table, I also had a couple from Arizona. And when they first came to the table, the wife, we were asking them where they're from, and the wife said, "We're from Prescott. We used to live in California." And we asked her where. She told us. And then she said, "We ran away from California." And I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah, we're so happy in Prescott." I decided not, we had just met them, and I had already had some interesting, courageous conversations with the other. I was like, I need to balance this out a little bit. I said, before I get into it, I just need to wait. So the next day, another couple arrived, and we're asking everybody where they are from, and this was the father-son team from Michigan, but they knew they had been in California for a while, and the son said, "Yeah, I just love San Luis Obispo. That's a great town. I love visiting there." And then the woman from Prescott, Arizona said, "Yeah, except for the California politics." I had gotten fed up because it was like the third time she had dissed and I said, "As opposed to Arizona politics?" And the table got quiet, and then her husband changed the topic. And that was the last time we talked about where we were from.
The next year and a half will be interesting to see whether the civil with the small c war becomes a civil with a big C war. Because the civility that we're dealing with, the fact that you were able to have these civil conversations with a little c, but that some of the positioning was more of a civil war with the capital C, there's got to be some concerns of the polarization that's going on.
That's exactly what I was thinking. And that's why I brought this to the podcast.
Right.
Because I was stunned by the regionalization of statehood.
Yeah.
And we are polarizing ourselves by our choice of state, almost. Now, when you retire, you have a choice. You know, I just stepped down from my means of employment thinking I was going to retire. One of my considerations was the political atmosphere of the state I was thinking about going back to. That shouldn't be an overriding concern in a representative democracy.
Well, it's the same concern Sharon and I have about if we were to ever leave California, where do we go?
Yeah.
You know, and do you pick a little blue island in a big red state, and can you be comfortable in that situation?
And my answer is yes, you can. You can. Every time your side loses, you've thrown away your vote. You feel like you've thrown away your vote, right? But when I was in Mississippi, in a red city in Mississippi, as a child, I voted because my dad taught me the importance of it. And I went by the national results. If our candidates won nationally, then my vote mattered, even though my electoral representatives may have voted for the loser. But now all politics are local.
Yes.
And you can live in a purple area, but you can live in a red area too. You just aren't going to have the kind of conversations you want to have.
Well, I would suggest that, living where I live, it's a purple county.
Yeah.
It has moved from red towards blue and maybe leaning a little bit blue, but it just the conversation as you described it was just indicative to me of the polarization that has occurred and continues to worsen. And it worries me about where we're headed from that standpoint.
So this is why the conversations are so important. If we're going to marginalize ourselves to the comfort of the color of the territory, then red county citizens will never know the views, the down to earth views of blue county citizens.
Right.
And I still believe, and it's been my experience, that in the end, people are good. And our mistake is castigating these beliefs as good or bad, or buying into beliefs based on sound bites.
Yeah,
but that's all you got, because there's nobody to check it against. I mean, I'm not, you don't have time to go past your neighborhood to say, what do you think about this or that? I've got a guy at the end of my street who has a great big quilt on the side of his garage that says F Biden. His driveway is littered with cars that he's a mechanic of some kind. I don't know, One day I'm going to be courageous enough to approach him and ask him about his views. Because I think deep down he's a good man.
Bring a microphone. I want to hear that. Part of the positive outcome of the conversations that you had was you got people to listen.
I think the positive outcome was I was willing to listen.
Well, that was the next half of the next half of the statement. You got others to listen, and you got to listen to what others had to say, because communication is optimally two-way.
Absolutely.
And the more time you take to listen, the more you can learn. And the more you can learn, the better you can position your understanding in terms of a reply. And from an educated standpoint, I think sometimes we react instead of respond. We don't take the time to formulate thoughtful retorts. We go with our gut, and that's when problems occur. So I'm sorry that I wasn't there. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall.
Well, my party didn't want to be a fly anywhere near it. I mean, and honestly, I realized, I was uncomfortable too, especially when I recognized from whence this kind of concept must have come. But that's the one thing we can't afford to do anymore, and that's walk away.
Right.
Especially when the other party is seeking an audience with the inferred contract that they will be the audience as well. He started the conversation. He really wanted to know what I thought. And I don't think he was trying to provoke me. I think he was trying to be honest. And I also think that he thought he had an ironclad argument. and he was trying it out on someone that he never tried it out on before.
Yeah. No, it would be interesting to have somebody with that strong of an opinion that conflicts or contrasts to where you and I sit, one of our podcasts, and have them share their thoughts. I think we've had a couple, but it would be interesting to deviate a little bit more from some of our guests to some others who might be a little bit further to the right than we are.
Yes, well, I agree. I mean, we've tried to get one of your colleagues,
right,
with some pushback.
And I would suggest that anybody who is listening who has friends or colleagues that might have a different opinion than what you're hearing and would like to join us, I'm always eager to hear what people have to say. You can go to the website at peterandphil.com, and there's a contact us opportunity at the bottom where you can say, hey, I'd like to join you. So go to the website if you want to, and but we would love to add some additional guests that maybe have a different lean on some of the issues, the social issues that we talk about. In the meantime, Phil, I think that was a very enlightening trip that you took, and I'd like to say that the people that I hung out with in Africa, their personalities were unique until themselves, but the animals were the most unique things. And sometimes we'll talk about conservation and animals and rhinos and everything else. But for today, thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. And I would like to also say that this same individual pointed out the fact that the one thing that we had that we had in common on a strong basis was our views of conservation. And he deeply appreciated that. But it was from that commonality that he felt comfortable in branching out.
Yeah, if you listen to people, you could actually find commonalities even amongst the most diverse individuals.
Well, Peter, I really enjoyed it. And to Nationwide, I want to express our appreciation for supporting us. To our listeners, if you have any comments about today's podcast, please add it to our chat, add it to our website. And I want to echo Peter's invitation for anybody who's truly interested in having a conversation. Let us know, and we'll see if we can get you on.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Nationwide. And you know what time it is, Phil?
I didn't get breakfast this morning, so it's breakfast.
All right, well, it's time to go hit some of your peanut butter, whatever's left of it, and some jelly. And to all our listeners, we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for joining us.
I thought I gave him a year's worth of peanut butter. He must eat a lot of it.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.